This is exclusive Maserati.
Exclusive, man.
Maserati's not starting no trouble.
I ain't doing anything.
Was waiting on the deal for like a while. You know the process, waiting on the deal. Might be paperwork or whatever. They was gonna do the deal. Prodigy and 50 got him the deal. Ozzy got so frustrated that he had the building surrounded, like 100 around the building.
What?
Yo, pay me? Yo, I got the buildings around it. I done hang with Maserati Fox, pulled out to him in Apollo.
He was the kind of man whose name made entire blocks go quiet. The kind of man who could walk into a crowded room, pull a gun on one of the most feared music executives alive, and not even flinch. When people whisper about Maserati Fox, they don't talk about mixtapes or chart numbers. They talk about chaos, about fear, about the kind of street power that left even his closest friends wondering what line he'd cross next. Imagine pulling a strap on Jimmy Henchman, the man at the center of one of hip-hop's bloodiest feuds, right there in the middle of Harlem's Apollo Theater. Fans still say it felt like the whole building froze in place, as if everyone knew a massacre could erupt at any second. And if that wasn't enough, this same man would later be ambushed, sprayed with bullets again and again, 21 shots tearing into his body. But against all odds, he lived. He survived what should have been his ending, and instead became the GOON 50 Cent kept closest, the street soldier who represented everything G-Unit came from. This is not just a story of survival. It's a story of betrayal, blood, and a man whose legend refuses to die. Queens remembers voices before it remembers faces. The voices float up from cracked sidewalks and snowed-in corners, from front porches where mothers keep count of who came home late and who never made it back. In that noise, one name traveled like a cold wind, a name people said with their chin tucked and their eyes to the side. They said Fox like a warning, like a story parents told so their sons wouldn't play brave at the wrong hour. They said the name the way you say thunder when you still hear the echo. And every time it came up, the room got quiet the way a room gets quiet right before the door opens. The story we're telling has lived for years in rumor and retelling, in half-remembered details and shaky phone footage, in late-night interviews where folks finally decided to say what they'd held in for a decade. Some parts sound like a movie, some parts sound like a court transcript, and some parts sound like the streets filling the gaps with what they believe is the truth. Fans are shocked by how the pieces lay together, because when you see it all at once, the timeline feels like a fuse that kept burning even after the first explosion. He was Jamaica Queens to the bone, a West Side Merrick kid who learned early that the world doesn't hand you your name. It makes you earn it. The first time people called him Fox, it wasn't because he moved smooth or looked sharp. It was because he left a warning on a man's face. A harsh slice that turned into a...
So why would I say that you trying to glorify that, though?
Glorify what? Kill him?
Being locked up.
Wouldn't.
That turned into a story told on steps and in barbershops. $1.50 is what they called it. The kind of scar that turns heads in daylight and throws shadows at night. That mark didn't just sit on someone else's skin. It stamped a new identity onto his. From then on, Fox wasn't a stage name. It was a record. The Maserati part came later, not in a courthouse or on a rap flyer, but in a studio thick with cigarette smoke and laughter. A joke turned into a title, tossed off in a moment when everyone thought they were just killing time between verses. Someone said it, the way a good line shows up in the room and everybody knows it's the one. Maserati Fox, fresh out the body shop. They repeated it and slapped palms, and he smiled like a man who'd just been handed a crown that already fit. The streets loved the way it sounded. It promised speed and shine and danger in one breath. Interview 308-318 if you grew up within those blocks. You already knew he had history with the boy who would become the city's loudest name. They were kids together before chains and tour buses, before headlines and sworn enemies. They crossed paths in schoolyards and corner stores, in the unglamorous hours when nothing looks like destiny. Later, when music started to pull boys out of basements and into real studios, Fox was there again, orbiting close to the noise that would become a movement. The cameras would catch them together from time to time, and people would point like they were seeing a constellation snap into place. Still, it wasn't the music that made people whisper. What kept his name alive in mouths that didn't even listen to rap were the moments he treated fear like a language he spoke better than anyone else in the room. He carried himself with the calm of someone who already made peace with consequence. The way folks tell it, he never hid from the chapters that put other men in the shadows. He wore them like a jacket and dared people to tug at the sleeve. When someone asked him about being locked up, he didn't tilt his head and act wise. He pushed back like, "Why wouldn't you be proud to have lived through it if you're standing here breathing?" That kind of answer sends a chill through people who prefer tidy morals and quick lessons. His friends didn't call him a musclehead. They called him a thinker. One of the closest said he was a king manipulator. Not as an insult, but like a chess compliment. Said he could take a kid on a couch and turn him into someone you'd want on your right side in a bad moment. Said he saw angles in a room full of chaos, always looking behind the second move for the third. That's not a small thing where they came from. In places like that, the difference between surviving and not is sometimes 1 second and one thought further than the other guy. Interview 733-743. There are stories the neighborhood holds close. The ones survivors tell on stoops at 2 a.m. when the air is thin and the cigarettes are down to the filter. They'll talk about the night a video shoot in the wrong borough almost turned into a headline. A younger artist, fresh on the label's roster, had pulled up with cameras and rented cars, not realizing the block belonged to another narrative. Fox called and asked where he was. When he heard the corner, he didn't lecture. He moved. A caravan rolled up so heavy it felt like the sidewalk tilted. Doors opened, heads nodded, and the kid was quietly escorted out. No shouting, no waving of guns, just presence, the kind you feel in your spine. That's how people say he operated when he wanted to avoid making the news. But then there were times he didn't mind if everybody knew. There's a tale about an office building in Midtown where a deal was stalled. People say the numbers were big, and the promise bigger, and the days stretched into weeks with answers always around the next call. Other men would have complained to their manager and kicked a trash can. Fox brought a small army. The streets say he surrounded the block with bodies, heads on a swivel, phones ringing up the chain until the people inside couldn't pretend they didn't hear. He didn't break glass or throw chairs. He just made his silence sound loud. The kind of loud that draws squad cars and tempts someone to press charges. Whatever that moment was supposed to be, it slipped through everybody's hands like water. People still argue about whether that was a
And I remember this pulled up like as it was a caravan. I forget how many cars it was. In my mind, there was 1,000 cars. But, you know, how many ever cars it was. I remember he pulled up.
Argue about whether that was a flex or a mistake. What's true is that the story never left the city's bloodstream. Interview 810-816, There is Another Night. Colder, more electric. The Apollo is a place where talent climbs the air and hangs from the rafters. That evening, people say, wasn't about talent. It was about tension braided so tight you could hear it hum. The feud between two worlds had been building. Press conferences on one side.
He's a cop. The love of the cop, he's a fool. Only fan Big Boss right now playing.
Side and whispers on the other. A rivalry that started as records and turned into a street calendar of close calls. Inside that space, with the gold and velvet and ghosts of singers long gone, Fox saw a man who symbolized the other side, the way some retell it. Metal detectors had already been fed their share of belts and keys, and everyone thought the worst had been left at the door. Then the plan shifted under people's feet. What happens next depends on who you ask. In every version, Fox made a choice and drew steel where nobody expected it. Some swear he turned to a friend and asked for the word like a soldier asking permission to cross a line. Some insist he stared straight through the crowd and saw only the target. People forget what music was playing, if music was playing at all. They remember the feeling of time pausing. Grown men held their breath. Women reached for arms without looking away. A few smart ones ducked. That's how a myth grows. Not just because a gun appeared where theater programs should be, but because for 3 seconds, everyone in the room stared into a future where the carpet ran red, and the city never forgave them for it. It didn't turn into that future. Not that night. The other side peeled away, not out of fear but calculation, and stepped back into the Harlem air. The air outside is different in winter. It stings and clears your head.
Mozzie got so frustrated that he had the building surrounded, like 100 niggas in the building.
What?
Yo, pay me. Yo, I got the building surrounded. And the owners of the Vol Sonic, they was like, yo, Mozzie got the building surrounded. They call him 50, like, yo, I don't know what's going on. Whatever, I don't know what 50 said. And Mozzie f***ed up the deal. They called the
That exit did not erase the message that had already been sent. Within days, there were reports of a luxury car peppered with angry punctuation. Windows spidered, doors dented, and the kind of ringing silence you get after thunder moves off but leaves the dogs barking. Friends of friends said the streets had answered. Nobody needed a press release to translate the grammar. Interview 939-959.
Serious foot injury.
100 motorbikes did. And it was the push start 300 cc's. And broke ribs. I remember Mozzie foot came off. That was crazy.
Wait, his foot came off?
The bottom of his whole foot was off. And then, everybody's tough until they hurt, till bones is broke. So it was just funny because Mozzie's whole foot came off and, ambulance came and they was like, we about to put alcohol.
People like to count bullet holes because numbers feel like facts in a world of stories. They say Fox took more than most men could and stayed on his feet. There's a tale where a debt meeting in a parked car went bad fast. Gunfire in the enclosed space, sharp and deafening. The smell of powder filling your lungs until it tastes like metal on your tongue. They say he grabbed the barrel with a hand already slick with blood, said something through clenched teeth that sounded like a dare, and wrestled for inches that turned into survival. Later, in a different season, at a dice game where luck and pride were taking turns slapping faces, more shots came from angles nobody saw coming. Somehow he walked away from that too, patched up by doctors who don't ask for context, only insurance. The legend grew because people love a survivor who carries scars like medals. All the while, Queens kept on spinning. And between those spins, there were quiet mornings at a mansion where engines woke up like animals and tires cut smooth paths through wet grass. Men who grew up on cracked cement learned how to throttle down and lean into a turn, laughing too loud beneath helmets that muffled their curses. Fox loved those bikes, loved the wind and the roar, loved pretending for a second that the past didn't have long arms. One day the ride went wrong. A slip, a slide, a crunch that silenced the jokes. Friends remember the look on his face when he tried to stand and something didn't feel connected anymore. The ambulance crew talked fast and clinical, reaching for bottles and gauze. He cursed like a kid and told them to slow down, like pain was just another enemy he could stare down until it blinked first. People still shake their heads when they bring up that crash, the way it humbled everyone who thought they were invincible for an afternoon. Interview 10/23/1046. In between the loud moments were the decisions that tethered him to something bigger than a friend group and a label logo. During a federal stretch, he met a man who ran a set with a name you don't say too often outside certain rooms. They shared air behind bars the way people do when time has carved their faces into careful masks. Whispered stories traded in low voices about betrayal and fractures. About how power splinters when pride grows faster than loyalty. Fox listened the way a man listens when he knows he might need this map later. When he came home, he moved with a new emblem stitched into his walk. Some call that growth. Some call it a trap with finer threads. The family angle is the one that catches in throats. Streets breed a certain kind of love. Loud, defiant, complicated. He loved hard in ways that don't always make good sense to outsiders. The people around him loved him back like he was both a shield and a magnet for trouble. They worried the way only families worry, proud and exhausted at the same time. When friends died, the grief hit like a wave that never quite receded, leaving salt on everything it touched. Queen's candlelight vigils look like stars came down to the sidewalk. You see faces glossed by tears and phone screens. Hear prayers that sound like arguments with God. Those nights sweeten and sour the memory at once. In the midst of all of it, he kept pushing something he called Dumb Out, a name that sounded playful until you watched how he used it. It was a brand and a banner, a mixtape stamp and a crew salute. He talked about pretty thug style with a grin, then followed it with blow you out slug style like punctuation. People laughed and shook their heads, charmed and alarmed in the same breath. He took the movement down south in a time when a lot of New York voices were allergic to crossing the Mason-Dixon for anything other than a show. He sounded proud at radio stations with cheap mics and long wait rooms, told DJs that Queen's slang traveled better than folks thought. The thing about momentum is it doesn't care whether it's dragging you toward a stage or toward a courtroom. Every step he took seemed to tug on both worlds. Fans watched the interviews and argued in comments. The neighborhood watched the corners and argued in kitchens. Emotions ran high whenever his name popped up, because he meant different things to different people. To some, he was a black hat in a city western. To others, a cautionary tale. To a few, a hero who did dirty work, so music money didn't have to. And beneath all of that were kids who looked up at murals and wondered what happens to men who never fully choose one road. One rumor that never dies is that he tried to put some of it on paper. Not the whole truth, because nobody ever writes the whole truth, but enough of it to make the letters feel heavy in your hands. A novel, they say, stitched from Queen's nights and hustler mornings. A way to turn scars into chapters. People who have read a few pages say it sounds like a confession hiding in fiction's clothes. Others say it was just another hustle, a new lane in a city that's always under construction. Either way, the idea of him writing makes some folks soften their voice when they tell it. Like they're picturing him alone with a pen, choosing words over war for an hour or two. And throughout this winding path, you can't escape the sense that he carried a clock inside him, ticking loud enough to be heard if you stood close. Not a countdown, exactly, but a rhythm. A drum that matched the city's heartbeat and wouldn't let him slow down even when slowing down might have saved him. Men like that become folklore because they burn bright enough to leave after-images when you close your eyes. Queens collects those after-images like a scrapbook, flips the pages on late summer nights, and tells the same stories again with tiny edits, new details, fresh confessions, and long sighs that sound like forgiveness trying to find a place to sit. The winter air in Queens doesn't forgive. It seeps into your bones, wraps around corners, and waits at bus stops. By the time Fox stepped out again after serving his latest bid, there was a sense in the neighborhood that he was ready to try something different. He spoke in interviews about business, about money moves that didn't involve blood on the sidewalk, about turning his survival into a new chapter. Fans hoped, family prayed, and even some rivals figured maybe he would finally cool down. But the streets don't just let go because you ask them to. Every old scar is a debt, and every past decision waits like a ghost at the edge of the block. Fox had a way of carrying contradictions. One day, he'd be joking with kids on the curb, handing out dollars like candy, reminding them to keep their heads in school. The next, he'd be in a studio session, heated, talking about enemies like they were shadows in the room. People who loved him said he was split between the man who wanted peace and the man who could never stop expecting war. That tension followed him everywhere, from strip clubs to corner stores, from family cookouts to radio interviews. His laugh could light a room, but his stare could empty it. Stories from those months swirl with drama. One night at a crowded lounge, a local promoter tried to clown him over unpaid verses. Fox stood up, the music cut short, and before anyone knew it, chairs scraped back and drinks hit the floor. He leaned in close, whispered something only that promoter heard, and the man's face drained pale. The crowd didn't see a punch, but they saw the way fear crawled over the promoter's shoulders like a heavy coat. Later, witnesses swore the man disappeared from the city for weeks, as if Fox's whisper alone carried exile. Fans are still shocked that a man could hold that much power without throwing a single blow. But there were also glimpses of him trying to rebuild. He spent afternoons with his stepdaughter, Deja, encouraging her to dream bigger than Queen's blocks. She loved music too, though not the kind that came with feuds and late-night calls. When tragedy took her life in a stray shooting on a city bus, it shattered whatever fragile balance Fox had left. Friends remember him weeping in a prison phone booth, cursing fate, slamming the receiver against the wall. Emotions ran high, and the family was left divided. Some blamed the streets for stealing her innocence. Others whispered that his own legacy drew bullets into their orbit. 50 Cent stepped in, paying for her funeral, but even that act stirred arguments. Was it loyalty or guilt? No one could agree, and grief split open wounds that had never healed. Back in Queens, whispers grew louder. The Apollo incident still hung in the air like unfinished business. People close to Jimmy Henchman hadn't forgotten, and neither had families tied to the Baisley Park shootings years earlier. It was as if Fox had layered debts upon debts, and every time he survived another ambush, another name was added to the list of people waiting for a chance. Fans describe it like he was living on borrowed time, each day a defiance against the math of survival. One cousin recalled telling him, "Maz, you can't cheat death forever." And Fox only laughed, tapping his chest where old bullets still sat like souvenirs. Death already tried, he said, and couldn't finish the job. Still, paranoia crept in. He kept his circle tight, switching cars, avoiding certain blocks, keeping his phone lines scrambled with short calls and coded slang. Yet he couldn't resist the pull of Queens. He returned again and again to diners he grew up in, to corners where he felt both hunted and at home. That's the curse of men like him. The past is also the only place that feels real. Friends begged him to move, to start fresh in Atlanta or Miami. He shrugged, said Queens made him and Queens would be where he stayed. The family was torn between pride and fear, between respecting his loyalty and dreading the price. Then came the day people still argue about in hushed tones. It was January, cold enough that breath turned to smoke when Fox rode in that Nissan SUV with 3 others. The stop sign at Farmers Boulevard and 133rd felt ordinary until a figure in black stepped out of nowhere. Shots erupted, echoing down the street, scattering neighbors behind curtains and cars. Bullets chewed through metal. Glass rained down like ice, and screams carried into the winter air. Fox was hit in the chest, stumbling out of the SUV, his blood staining snow that had fallen just hours earlier. The others were struck too, 2 men bleeding heavy, a young woman grazed, her eyes wide with shock. It felt like the end of a movie, but this was no film. Queen stood still, watching a man who had cheated death for decades finally collapse under its weight. When the news hit, emotions ran high. Fans lit up comment sections with disbelief, swearing Fox couldn't be gone, that he'd rise again like he always did. Family members broke down on sidewalks, clinging to each other as cameras rolled. Some said it was karma, others said it was revenge, but all agreed it was the streets cashing in their receipts. Detectives moved fast, linking the murder back to old wounds from the late 90s, pulling in names that had waited too long for closure. Within weeks, an arrest was made, headlines screaming that justice had arrived. But justice is slippery in Queens, and what looked like resolution soon unraveled. The witness at the center of it all cracked under pressure, recanting testimony, claiming detectives threatened her with losing her children if she didn't point fingers. Courtrooms buzzed, families clashed, and once again the truth blurred. The accused walked free, leaving Fox's murder unsolved, another cold case added to a long list. Fans were furious, convinced the system had failed again. The family was left in limbo, mourning a man whose life had been chaos, but whose absence felt like silence in a city used to his noise. As the years passed, his legend only grew. Interviews resurfaced, old footage replayed, and whispers turned into podcasts and street documentaries. Some paint him as a monster, others as a martyr, but no one can deny the mark he left. In Queens, murals bloom on brick walls, candles burn out and get replaced, and kids who never met him still throw his name into rhymes. Fox became more than a man. He became a cautionary tale, a ghost that walks with every young hustler who thinks they can outsmart the streets. After his death, Queens didn't just mourn, it argued. In barbershops, diners, and on stoops, people couldn't agree on what Fox truly represented. Some saw him as the ultimate survivor, a man who refused to bow down no matter how many bullets ripped through his body. Others whispered that he was a curse, that his presence brought storms wherever he went. Emotions ran high and the family was left divided. Cousins clashed over whether to keep his name alive or let it rest. Old friends replayed memories like scratched records, sometimes laughing, sometimes breaking down mid-sentence. Fans flooded online spaces, writing long posts about how they felt Fox embodied the raw spirit of Queens, flawed, dangerous, but undeniably real. What made the debates louder was the mystery that lingered. Who really pulled the trigger that January night? The arrests that fell apart left a void, and into that void poured rumor after rumor. Some swore it was revenge for the Basley Park shooting in 1998, that old ghosts had finally come to collect. Others believed it was fallout from the Apollo feud, the kind of grudge that never dies even when years pass. Still others insisted the killer came from closer to home, maybe even from inside his circle. Nobody could prove anything, and that silence kept Queens buzzing with theories. When there's no official closure, people create their own stories, and Fox's story was already bigger than life. Throughout the chaos, 50 Cent stayed quiet in public, but loud in action. He covered funeral costs, paid respect at vigils, and even dropped cryptic posts that fans dissected for hidden meanings. Was it guilt? Loyalty? Or just a final act of friendship to a man who once rode beside him in the toughest times? Tony Yayo spoke on interviews calling Fox a king manipulator, reminding the world that Fox wasn't just muscle, he was strategy. Banks, usually silent, was caught once shrugging, saying Fox always lived like he was in the last chapter of a book. Fans are shocked at how the G-Unit circle reflected on him, half in admiration, half in warning. Then there were the tapes. Old interview clips resurfaced. Fox on grainy cameras, voice thick with bravado, saying he'd never fear another man, saying death already had its chance and failed. Hearing those words after his murder sent chills down spines. It felt like he had predicted his own ending, like he knew he was living on a razor's edge. Fans replayed those clips endlessly, dropping comments like, "He spoke this into existence," and "The streets claimed their own prophet." In a world where perception is often stronger than fact, those videos cemented Fox's myth. Still, behind the myth was a man. His girlfriend, who had been in the SUV that day, struggled to tell her story. In interviews, she described the glass shattering, the sound of bullets tearing through metal, the way Fox stumbled out like he was still trying to fight death one last time. Her words cracked when she spoke about how he collapsed on the cold sidewalk, how the snow stained red. Family members remember her trembling in court when asked to testify, the weight of truth and fear pressing on her at once. Some relatives supported her, others distanced themselves, afraid her involvement would drag them further into the storm. The streets, though, had their own way of remembering. Murals painted his face on cracked brick, candles burned every January in his name, and dice games on backstreets sometimes paused as someone poured liquor onto the ground. Kids who never knew him tried to imitate his walk, his slang, his aura. Parents pulled them back, whispering that Fox's path ended in blood. But for those kids, the legend was louder than the warning. That's how myths work. They shine brighter than the consequences they carry. At the same time, Queens couldn't ignore the pain Fox left behind. Dodge's death years earlier had already broken hearts, and now with Fox gone, it felt like tragedy kept stalking the family. Some relatives couldn't bear it, moving out of the city, trying to start fresh in other states. Others stayed, holding tight to the blocks that had shaped them, insisting they wouldn't be chased away. Arguments broke out at family gatherings. Was Fox a victim of his environment or the architect of his own downfall? Tears mixed with curses. Plates slammed onto tables, hugs followed by silence. The family was left divided, and healing felt impossible. In the music world, his name became shorthand for the brutal reality behind the glamorous image of rap. New artists brought him up in songs, referencing the man who pulled a gun on Jimmy Henchman, who took 21 shots and lived, who became 50 Cent's top goon. Those lines always got reactions, cheers from some, uneasy looks from others, because saying Fox's name meant invoking both fear and respect. It meant admitting that the industry's glitter had shadows too dark to ignore. What added another twist was the rumor of his unpublished writings. A few pages of his novel, The Game Don't Change, circulated on the streets. People swore they could hear his voice in the lines, raw and unpolished, like a confession whispered through paper. Passages described Queens nights, hustles gone wrong, betrayals that smelled like blood. Fans treated those pages like scripture, proof that Fox wasn't just fists and guns, but also a man who wanted to be heard in a different way. Whether true or fake, those pages deepened the legend. By the time years had passed, Fox's story no longer belonged only to those who knew him. It became a city tale, carried from generation to generation, shifting with each retelling. Sometimes he was a villain, sometimes a hero, always unforgettable. His name lived on in whispers, arguments, and graffiti, in podcasts and documentaries, in the cracks of Queens concrete. People say if you walk past Baisley Park late at night, you can still hear dice hitting pavement and voices carrying his name into the dark, reminding the city that Maserati Fox may be gone, but he'll never be erased. Time does strange things to a story. Every year that passes without answers stretches the myth of Fox further. turning him from a man into something closer to folklore. Queens wears his ghost like a jacket. It's heavy, uncomfortable, and it never quite fits right. But no one dares take it off. People still argue about what really happened that January afternoon, and those arguments fuel the legend more than any courtroom ever could. When truth slips through fingers, rumor takes its place. And rumor is the oxygen that kept Fox's name alive long after he fell. In the clubs, DJs drop old tracks that mention his name, and the crowd shouts back like they're invoking a spell. Some say it's respect, others call it obsession. Fans are shocked when they realize kids barely out of their teens, who were toddlers when Fox walked Queens, now throw his name into freestyles like they were there the night he faced Jimmy Henchman. That's how deep his imprint went. It wasn't just the violence. It was the defiance. The way he moved through the world as if rules bent around him. That image burned itself into Queen's memory. And memory has a way of outlasting fact. Behind the scenes, his family kept struggling to find balance. Birthdays passed with empty chairs. Holidays felt like rehearsals for grief. Some relatives wanted the murder reopened, pressing detectives for answers, writing letters, demanding updates. Others begged them to let it go, saying chasing justice would only reopen wounds and put new targets on their backs. Emotions ran high. Siblings stopped speaking. Cousins stopped showing up. One aunt told a reporter she hadn't forgiven Fox for the chaos he dragged into their bloodline. Another swore he had a heart bigger than anyone knew, that he just never learned how to put it ahead of his pride. The family was left divided, splintered the way the city itself was splintered over his name. In interviews, men who once stood next to him finally began to talk. Some admitted they feared him even when they loved him. One recalled how Fox could turn a casual night into chaos with just a glance. Another swore that Fox once saved his life, pulling him out of a trap that would have ended him. These stories painted a man who was both protector and predator, loyal friend and dangerous rival, all depending on which version of him you got that day. The contradictions stacked higher than the truth, and in the end, maybe that was the point. Fox was never meant to be simple. The Apollo story kept resurfacing, twisted with each telling. Some insisted he had the hammer out, ready to unleash mayhem in front of hundreds. Others claimed it was bluff and bravado, that he never would have pulled the trigger with so many eyes on him. But even the skeptics admitted the tension was real. The silence that swept through the theater undeniable. That moment, whether it ended in smoke or not, became the jewel in his crown of chaos. Proof that Fox didn't just walk into danger, he dragged it into the spotlight and dared anyone to look away. And then there were the bullets. People love to count them, as if numbers make the madness more digestible. 21 shots, some said. 12 in one instance, others corrected. Fans debated which ambush was the most severe, which scars were real and which were exaggerations. But what nobody doubted was that Fox kept coming back. Patched up, scarred, grinning like he had outplayed death itself. That resilience became his brand, more powerful than any mixtape could ever be. It gave him an aura of invincibility that made allies lean in close and enemies sharpen their knives. Still, survival has a cost. Fox's body carried more metal than some junkyards, and every limp, every scar, every stiff movement was a reminder that he was paying interest on his life. Behind the bravado, there were nights where pain bent him over, where he cursed old wounds in the quiet of his room. Those close to him said he grew restless, frustrated that he couldn't move like he once did. Frustration turned into anger. Anger turned into outbursts. He tried to bury it under laughter, under fast rides and louder nights, but pain always found him. The same streets that celebrated his toughness also whispered about his decline, about how long a man could outrun both bullets and time. Rumors of betrayal grew louder too. Whispers said people close to him might have tipped off enemies, might have seen opportunity in his downfall. No proof ever surfaced, but Queens thrives on speculation. Every shake of a head, every quiet conversation in a diner booth added fuel to the fire. Fans were shocked when they heard theories pointing fingers at faces once seen standing beside him. Nothing was confirmed, but suspicion is its own kind of poison, and it spread fast. In the end, Fox's legacy wasn't written by judges or detectives. It was written by the people, family torn in half, friends haunted by memories, enemies who still flinched at his name, and fans who turned him into a myth larger than Queens itself. He pulled a gun on a feared exec in front of the world. He took bullets that should have ended him. He lived as 50 Cent's top enforcer, and he died in the same streets that made him. Queens remembers not with peace but with fire. And every January the story is told again, louder, darker, more dramatic, as if Fox himself refuses to let it fade. The thing about legends is that they don't stay buried. Fox's story kept clawing its way back into the spotlight, whether through a resurfaced interview, a leaked track, or a podcast hungry for clicks. People who never met him spoke about him like they'd grown up 2 houses down. Some called him a monster, others a martyr. But everyone agreed his presence was unforgettable. That's the mark of a man who lived like a storm. He might pass, but you still hear the thunder long after. In Queens, the streets talk about Fox like he's still around. A dice game gets interrupted when someone mentions his name, and suddenly the laughter fades, replaced by silence thick enough to choke on. Old heads lean in, lowering their voices, reminding the young ones that Fox wasn't just another rapper orbiting G Unit. He was the pulse of the streets that fed the machine. Maz was different, they say, and the way they shake their heads tells you it's not just respect. It's fear wrapped in admiration. Every January, vigils pop up with candles, murals touched up with fresh paint, and kids too young to remember him still wearing tees with his face on them. They don't know the full weight of his choices, but they know the aura. It's that aura that draws them in. The idea that Fox was untouchable, that he survived 21 shots, that he stood eye to eye with men others bowed to. The myth is cleaner than the reality, and reality was messy, filled with betrayals, arrests, and a family torn down the middle. His stepdaughter's death still echoes through the family. Some relatives whisper that the streets cursed them, that Fox's wars pulled innocent lives into the crossfire. Others push back, saying Daja was proof the world is cruel no matter who her stepfather was. Arguments at family gatherings spiral out of control, plates slammed on tables, tears breaking through curses. Emotions ran high, and the family was left divided. Cousins blocked each other on social media. Mothers refused to sit in the same church pews. And through it all, Fox's name was both the wound and the bandage. And what about the music world? His absence left a hole in the G Unit narrative that could never quite be filled. Whenever 50 talked about loyalty and betrayal, fans swore they heard Fox between the lines. Tony Yayo kept his memory alive, calling him a strategist, a manipulator who knew how to turn nothing into something. Other artists, less generous, called him reckless, said he blew million-dollar opportunities with his temper, like the day he surrounded that building over a stalled deal. Whichever side you believed, the takeaway was the same. Fox was never small. He made every moment big, for better or worse. Then there's the novel, The Game Don't Change. Only fragments have ever surfaced, but those fragments are enough to make people wonder what else he left behind. In one passage, he described a hustler walking through Queens with ghosts trailing behind him, each one whispering about debts unpaid. Fans swore he was writing about himself, that he knew the ending long before it arrived. Others dismissed it as street-lit fantasy, another hustle to keep his name buzzing while he sat behind bars. But even the skeptics admitted the timing was eerie, like he was narrating his own downfall in advance. The unsolved murder added fuel to the fire. The case collapsing in court left a hole that speculation rushed to fill. Every time the story was retold, new suspects appeared, new motives invented, new twists imagined. Podcasts broke down theories. YouTubers dramatized every detail, and Queens just kept shaking its head. Some people swore the shooter had ties to the past. Others said it was someone Fox trusted too much. Nobody really knew, and maybe nobody ever will. But that uncertainty kept his name alive. Because a closed case is an ending, and Fox's story was never meant to have one. Through all of it, his legend stood as both a warning and an inspiration. To some, he proved you could cheat death, stare down power, and live like a king even if the crown was crooked. To others, he was a grim reminder that no matter how many times you outrun fate, eventually it catches you at a stop sign on a cold Queens afternoon. The truth is, both sides are right. Fox lived as if every day was borrowed, and in the end, the debt came due. And yet, Queens still talks. Late-night conversations in smoky rooms still circle back to him. His name still sparks debates online, still pulls viewers to documentaries and clips. He became more than a man, more than a rapper, more than a soldier. He became a story. One Queens refuses to stop telling. One fans still argue about. One that makes people shake their heads in disbelief. Maserati Fox pulled a gun on Jimmy Henchman, survived 21 bullets, rode beside 50 Cent as his top goon, and left this world in a blaze that only added to his legend. And as long as Queens has a voice, his story will never be silent. His story will never be silent. When the story of Fox gets told now, it doesn't sound like one man's life. It sounds like a whole city's confession. Queens carries him in every corner, as if the sidewalks themselves are stamped with his name. When young rappers try to prove they're real, they drop Fox's name like a code, knowing it still rattles anyone who remembers. Old-timers roll their eyes, saying these kids never saw what it was like to stand in a room where Fox decided how the night would end. But even their eye rolls come with a certain respect. Because love him or hate him, Fox demanded space. And even in death, he still has it. His story became entertainment and tragedy at once. The media painted him as the villain. The blogs turned his survival stories into clickbait, and fans couldn't stop arguing about whether he was cursed or chosen. People whispered that he was impossible to kill, a man who took 21 bullets and laughed in death's face. But others said that living like that was no victory. It was just delaying the inevitable. One Queens resident put it best. Fox lived like every day was his last, and then one day it really was. The contradictions never end. To some family members, he was the protector, the man who brought groceries, cracked jokes at dinner, and lifted kids onto his shoulders. To others, he was the source of every sleepless night. Every knock on the door they feared would bring police or enemies. Fans are shocked when they hear how divided the family still is. One brother refused to attend his memorial, saying Fox's choices dragged them all through hell. Another stood at the mural crying, insisting Fox had a heart too big for his own good. The family was left divided, pulled apart by grief, pride, and old wounds that never healed. And then there's the mystery of the murder. The collapse of the trial left people restless. When the witness admitted detectives pushed her into pointing fingers, the whole case crumbled like paper in the rain. Jamal Scott walked free, and once again the streets buzzed louder than any judge's gavel. Some said it proved the system was corrupt, that Fox never had a chance at real justice. Others said it was the streets doing what the streets always do, protecting their own, punishing their own, and keeping outsiders guessing. Either way, no conviction meant no closure. Queens still wakes up every January remembering that stop sign, that SUV, and the man who stumbled into the snow for the last time. What keeps the legend alive are the stories people can't stop retelling. The Apollo Theater night where a gun appeared in the middle of velvet and gold. The $1 million deal that evaporated when he surrounded a building with 100 men. The dice games that ended in blood but never ended him. The bike crash at 50's mansion where he laughed through pain. Most men couldn't survive. Each story is told a little differently depending on who tells it, but each adds another layer to the myth. It's no longer about what really happened. It's about what the city chooses to remember. And in that remembering, Fox has become untouchable. His name lingers in podcasts, documentaries, YouTube breakdowns, and late-night arguments. The music industry uses him as shorthand for the darker side of hip-hop, the proof that the line between studio and street is thinner than people like to admit. He pulled a gun on Jimmy Henchman. He survived the impossible. He became 50 Cent's top goon. And he died in the same streets that raised him. Queens doesn't let go of men like that. Their stories are stitched into the fabric of the city. Even now, years later, when someone says Maserati Fox, the room changes. Shoulders tighten, voices drop, and eyes flick toward the door like they expect him to walk in, grinning, scars and all. That's the legacy of a man who lived like a storm. You can move past the rain, but the thunder always stays. The years since Fox's murder have not softened his image. They've sharpened it. The longer the case remains unsolved, the more people treat him like an unfinished sentence. Every time a new rapper gets shot, every time a feud spills into the streets, Fox's name comes back up as a comparison. Remember Fox, someone says. and the room goes quiet. It's not just nostalgia, it's a warning. Podcasts pick apart his life like detectives, narrating his survival tales with dramatic music. Bloggers call him the archetype of the street soldier, both feared and doomed. Fans are shocked by how often he's brought up when people talk about the realist figures tied to G-Unit. His story gets repackaged for a new generation, and with each retelling, the lines between truth and legend blur even more. But behind all that noise, his family still carries the scars. His girlfriend, who lived through the ambush, barely speaks publicly anymore. Relatives argue every time Fox's name trends again. Some say the constant chatter dishonors his memory. Others say it keeps him alive. Emotions run high whenever the topic resurfaces, and the family was left divided long after the funeral. One cousin confessed in tears that Fox's story feels like a curse, while another insists it's a crown they should wear proudly. The streets, however, don't care about healing. They remember the fire, not the wounds. Murals still bloom on brick walls. Candles get lit each January, and kids still shout his name in freestyles. To them, Fox isn't tragedy. He's proof that toughness can outlive bullets. But older voices shake their heads, warning that his end is exactly what happens when you chase invincibility too long. He thought he couldn't die, one man said. But the streets proved him wrong. The Apollo story, the 21 bullets, the $1 million deal gone sideways, all of it plays like chapters in a crime drama, and Queens tells it that way. People lean into the chaos, quoting him, arguing about whether he was fearless or reckless. The answer, of course, is both. Fox lived like a man who knew the clock was always ticking, and he made sure every second exploded loud enough for everyone to hear. And that's why, even now, his name is impossible to erase. Maserati Fox isn't just remembered as a rapper or a goon. He's remembered as the man who pulled a gun on Jimmy Henchman, survived what should have been death, rode beside 50 Cent, and left Queens in a blaze of unanswered questions. No matter how much time passes, his legend refuses to fade, because legends don't die, they echo. The echo of Fox's story stretches far beyond Queens now. His name floats in the same breath as the city's biggest legends, not because of records sold or awards won, but because of the way he lived on the edge of chaos. When people talk about hip-hop's dark intersections with the streets, his life becomes the case study. He was the example professors could use in classrooms, the cautionary tale mentors whispered to their students, and the myth rappers dropped into bars to prove they knew the history. And yet, for all the myth-making, the details remain messy. Some swear Fox changed after prison, that he was trying to turn his scars into something creative. They point to the pages of The Game Don't Change as proof. A man wrestling with his past, scribbling stories that sounded too close to confession. Others say those pages were just another hustle, that he could never leave the life behind. Fans are split, with emotions running high, because they want to believe in redemption but can't ignore the way his story ended. The family was left divided too, between those who clung to the idea of his second chance and those who believed he was destined for the same. Streets that raised him. The collapse of the murder case only deepened the divide. Detectives swore they had the killer, but when the witness recanted, it all fell apart. To some, that was justice slipping away. To others, it was proof that Fox's death was meant to remain an unsolved riddle, another Queen's mystery that would never find closure. Every January, the pain sharpens again. Vigils turn into debates. Debates turn into arguments. And the legend grows louder with every passing year. 50 Cent still gets asked about Fox, and though he rarely speaks in detail, his silence speaks volumes. When Yayo brings up Fox in interviews, his tone mixes admiration with warning, as if to remind everyone that Fox was both a soldier and a storm. Other rappers reference him in songs, painting him as a symbol of raw authenticity, the kind that can't be manufactured. Fans are shocked by how present his shadow still is in the culture, almost as if he never left. The truth is, Fox's story doesn't have an ending. Not really. It lingers in every mural, every whispered story, every retelling of the Apollo Theater showdown. It lives in the memory of 21 bullets that couldn't kill him, in the image of him pulling a gun on Jimmy Henchman, in the role he played as 50's top enforcer. And it lingers in the cold January air of Queens, where people still wonder who was really behind the mask that day, and why the law could never seal the case. Maserati Fox became more than a man. He became a question mark, one Queens keeps asking itself. And maybe that's why his story endures, because the moment it gets an answer, the myth dies. Until then, his legend stays alive, louder than ever, echoing through the streets that made him, the family that mourns him, and the fans who still can't believe he's gone. Fans who still can't believe he's gone. What's left behind when a man like Fox is gone is not silence. It's noise that refuses to fade. Every corner of Queens still hums with his memory. Every block still carries a piece of the chaos he brought with him. Kids who never met him wear his face on shirts. Rappers name drop him like a ritual, and older voices shake their heads with that tired mix of fear and respect. It's as if the city itself refuses to let him rest, replaying his greatest hits and darkest nights over and over like a scratched tape. In the industry, Fox's name became a measuring stick. When young artists brag about being real, critics throw his name in as the benchmark. Are you Fox real? It's not about music charts. It's about how far you're willing to go when the lights are off and the streets are watching. Fans are shocked at how often his story resurfaces, how his image remains as fresh as the day he pulled a gun at the Apollo. Every documentary, every YouTube breakdown, every late-night podcast keeps him alive, not as a man, but as a symbol of something untamable. Yet for his family, the noise is torture. Anniversaries feel like open wounds. Birthdays pass in silence, marked only by arguments over whether to celebrate or mourn. One sister refuses to attend vigils, saying Fox's choices cursed the family, while another organizes them, insisting his memory must be honored. Emotions run high, and the family was left divided, some clinging to his humanity, others trying to escape his shadow. Grief doesn't unite them. It fractures them again and again, proving that the scars he left were deeper than bullets. Still, Queens insists on remembering the spectacle. The Apollo incident is told like theater, a near tragedy frozen in suspense. The 21 shots are retold like a miracle, proof that Fox was too stubborn to die on anyone else's terms. The $1 million deal that dissolved into chaos gets replayed like a cautionary tale about pride and paranoia. And his death at that stop sign lives on like an unfinished movie, a cliffhanger with no resolution. Each story keeps his myth inflated because myths thrive where truth refuses to stand. 50 Cent's silence only fuels the fire. People read meaning into every pause, every look, every offhand comment. Did he feel guilty? Did he feel relieved? Was Fox a brother he couldn't save? Or a storm he was glad to survive? The lack of answers makes fans argue harder, spinning theories that only make the legend bigger. And so, Fox remains, half hero, half villain, always larger than life. He pulled a gun on one of the most feared men in hip-hop. He survived bullets that should have ended him. He stood as 50's top goon, a strategist and a storm, a protector and a threat. And in the end, he died the way many said he always would. Fast, loud, and unforgettable. Maserati Fox's story doesn't close with a neat ending. It lingers in the air of Queens, in the whispers of his family, in the shocked voices of fans still trying to process him. His life was chaos, his death was tragedy, but his legacy is something else entirely. It's an echo that refuses to fade, a reminder that some men are too big to vanish, even when the streets finally catch up to them. And that's where the story of Maserati Fox finally settles, though even settles feels like the wrong word. Because his name doesn't rest, it circles. It circles in Queens, where kids still spray his face on walls and elders still shake their heads when his name comes up. It circles in the music industry, where artists invoke him as shorthand for what real used to mean. It circles in his family, where grief and pride fight each other every time someone lights a candle in his memory. He pulled a gun on Jimmy Henchman in a theater packed with eyes, and the city froze. He took 21 bullets and lived to laugh about it, as if death itself wasn't enough to scare him. He stood next to 50 Cent not just as another affiliate, but as a reminder of where G-Unit came from, raw, reckless, and unfiltered. His life was equal parts myth and mess, a cycle of survival, betrayal, loyalty, and violence, and his death, still unsolved, only deepened the legend. But the question that refuses to go away is this: was Fox a hero or a warning? Was he proof that toughness can outlive bullets, or proof that no man outruns the streets forever? Fans are shocked every time his name resurfaces. Not because of new facts, but because of how alive the myth still feels. The family was left divided, and Queens itself feels divided too, between celebrating him and condemning him, between honoring his name and fearing the weight of it. And now, it's your turn. What do you think Fox's story really means? Was he a man who defied death until it finally caught him? Or just another tragedy in a city full of them? Should his name be remembered as a legend, or as a warning to those chasing invincibility? Drop your thoughts in the comments. Because this is one story Queens refuses to close on its own. If you made it this far, don't forget to like this video, hit that subscribe button, and turn on notifications so you never miss another deep dive into the stories the streets can't stop telling. Your opinion matters here. Let us know if Fox's legacy was glory, grief, or something in between.